Her son mocked her hearing aid, cupping his ear and shouting across the cafe like she was a joke. Nancy Ellison, 68, didn't argue. She smiled, paid the bill, and went home in silence. By fall, Derek would lose his lease. His fraud case would land on a desk at Housing Services, and every voicemail he left, begging for money, would play to no one. He thought she couldn't hear him. She could. She just chose not to listen. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The cafe was all glass and chatter. Industrial lights hanging low, espresso machines hissing like impatient snakes. Nancy Ellison sat across from her son and his girlfriend, both of them glowing with the kind of effortless arrogance that came with youth and Wi-Fi. She folded her hands neatly in her lap, her hearing aid faintly whirring beneath a loose curl of gray hair. Derek was mid-story about a startup party he hadn't really been invited to, leaning back in his chair like the world still owed him applause. "You should have seen the spread," he said, cutting into his avocado toast as if it were a steak. Everyone from Columbus Tech was there. Nancy smiled politely. The cafe's background noise made his voice bounce in fragments. She caught tech and everyone, but not the rest. She leaned in slightly, focusing, tilting her right ear toward him. That's when Derek cupped his hand to his ear, loud enough for the next table to notice. "Can you even hear the specials, Mom?" he teased, grin flashing sharp. Tracy's laugh came right on cue. Practiced, performative. "Turn up your grandma radar," she chirped, twirling her straw. Nancy felt the burn rise in her cheeks, not from embarrassment but restraint. She reached for her water, letting the ice clink softly before she spoke. "Oh, I hear plenty," she said mildly, "just not always what's worth listening to." For a split second, Derek's smirk faltered, then returned, broader. "Ha! Classic mom comeback." He turned to Tracy. "She's always been quick with the zingers." Tracy nodded, not listening, already scrolling through her phone. The server arrived with pancakes Nancy hadn't ordered but accepted anyway. She poured syrup slowly, focusing on the amber swirl rather than the noise. The sweetness was almost medicinal. Across the table, Derek was talking about his consulting projects, the kind that never had actual names. Nancy nodded at intervals, though the sound blurred. Her hearing aid caught the high pitches of Tracy's laughter but not the lower hum of Derek's lies. When the check came, Derek tapped it once with his finger. "You got this, right, Mom? You love your brunches." Nancy blinked. Once, then twice. "Of course." She slipped her card into the leather folder without hesitation. Her hand was steady. Inside, she could feel something cooling. Not anger exactly, but a quiet decision forming like frost. Outside, the autumn air cut sharp and clean. The leaves along High Street had gone crisp around the edges, swirling like torn confetti from someone else's celebration. Derek and Tracy waved a distracted goodbye before crossing toward their car. Nancy stood for a moment on the sidewalk, the sound of traffic layering around her. A bus exhaling, a bike chain snapping into motion, someone calling to a friend across the street. Her hearing aid filtered the chaos, softening everything to a distant hum. It was almost peaceful. Later that afternoon, Nancy knelt among her marigolds, the earth cool beneath her palms. The hum of insects was steadier than any human voice. She didn't wear her hearing aid while gardening. She liked the muffled quiet, the way the world became gentle when she chose not to listen. Joyce Manley's voice floated over the fence. "You survived brunch, I see." Nancy looked up, smiling faintly. "Barely." Joyce appeared, pruning shears in hand, her gray hair pulled into a messy bun that said she didn't care and wanted everyone to know it. "He made fun of the aid again, didn't he?" Nancy hesitated, pressing soil around the roots of a fresh plant. "He thinks it's a joke." Joyce snorted. "So was his last promotion, apparently." That earned the smallest laugh from Nancy. Quick, fragile. She brushed dirt from her knees and stood, stretching her back. The sun dipped lower, glinting off the tiny silver edge of her hearing aid resting on the porch rail. Maybe I should have taken it out during brunch, Nancy said quietly. Would have saved me from hearing what didn't matter. Joyce crossed her arms. Or you just save that trick for when he wants something. Nancy met her friend's eyes. Something steady flickered there, a shared understanding. Maybe I will. The wind shifted, carrying the faint sound of a siren from High Street, but Nancy barely heard it. She looked down at her clean hands, at the small hearing aid glinting like a secret weapon in the sun. Her lips curved, not quite a smile. The bungalow was hushed by the time Nancy stepped through the door, the faint smell of soil and lavender following her in. She set her purse on the entry table, peeled off her cardigan, and reached up to slip the small hearing aid from her ear. The sudden quiet wrapped around her like a soft blanket, thick, heavy, almost protective. She placed the device in its tiny velvet case, shut it, and sat down in her armchair by the window. The afternoon light angled in through the curtains, turning dust motes into slow drifting stars. Somewhere, a clock ticked. Somewhere farther, a neighbor's dog barked. But here, inside her chosen silence, every sound seemed to ask permission first. Nancy folded her hands and let the replay begin. The cafe's noise. Derek's hand cupped mockingly to his ear. Tracy's thin, chiming laugh. Can you even hear the specials? Mom, turn up your grandma radar. Her son's voice had always carried that same sharp undercurrent, the tone he'd used as a teenager when he thought sarcasm counted as maturity. She'd chalked it up to insecurity then, to growing pains. Now she wasn't so sure. Her eyes shifted to the framed photo on the mantel, Derek at age 9, holding a paper medal from the elementary spelling bee. His grin then had been pure, proud. She remembered how he'd pronounced gratitude perfectly, and how she'd clapped the loudest. Gratitude, she whispered now, the word brittle in her mouth. The phone buzzed on the side table, jolting her. She didn't rush to answer. The machine picked up automatically her own recorded voice, warm and even, filling the room. You've reached Nancy Ellison. Leave your message and I'll call you back when I can. Then came Derek's voice, bright but strained. Hey, Mom. Just checking in. Been a crazy week. Listen, I might need to borrow a little cash for rent, just until bonus time hits. You know how it goes. A pause, a half laugh that sounded practiced. Anyway, call me when you get this, okay? Love you. The message ended with a faint beep. Nancy sat perfectly still. No sighs, no muttering, no automatic movement toward the phone. Just stillness. The silence afterward felt cleaner than anything she'd heard all day. By the time she reached the kitchen, twilight had thickened into the corners of the house. She filled the kettle, waiting for it to boil, the steam curling like thought made visible. Joyce's voice came to her memory again, wry, grounded. Save that trick for when he wants something. Nancy smiled faintly to herself. She reached for her planner, flipping past grocery lists and senior center schedules until she reached a clean page. Tomorrow, she wrote, in deliberate cursive, call bank, review finances. The kettle whistled. She poured the tea, sat at the counter, and stared out the window at her small front yard. The porch light flicked on automatically, bathing the marigolds in a gentle amber glow. Each bloom looked perfectly content not being seen. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Derek, shorter this time. Mom, did you get my voicemail? She set the phone face down on the counter. The vibration echoed briefly through the wood and then stopped. For a long time she just sipped her tea, listening to her own pulse in her ears. There was something satisfying about this silence, the way she could control it. own it. Her hearing aid wasn't a weakness anymore. It was a switch. She could decide who deserved to be heard. The next morning, Nancy met Joyce at their usual booth in the diner. The place smelled of bacon grease and weak coffee, comfort disguised as chaos. Joyce waved her spoon in greeting. "You look peaceful, which worries me." Nancy smirked. "I took your advice." "Which one?" "I give so many pearls." "The one about saving silence for when he wants something." Joyce's grin spread slow and knowing. "Finally learning volume control." Nancy stirred her coffee. "I'm just done pretending it doesn't hurt." Joyce reached across the table and squeezed her wrist. "Then maybe it's time you stop giving him the benefit of your hearing." Nancy's laugh was soft but certain. "Already working on that." She pulled an envelope from her purse, a printed appointment slip from the bank. Joyce raised her eyebrows. "Big plans?" "Just a little financial housekeeping," Nancy said, folding it neatly again. "It's good to know exactly what's mine." When she returned home, she placed her hearing aid back in its charger and opened her windows to the cool evening air. The sounds of the neighborhood filtered in, the hum of distant traffic, a boy calling for his dog, wind nudging the trees. Nancy listened for a while, then closed the windows one by one, sealing the quiet back inside. Her phone blinked with another voicemail from Derek. She didn't play it. Instead, she reached for her planner again and drew a small checkmark beside callbank. Her lips curved, faint but firm. The lobby of the Franklin County Housing Authority smelled faintly of copier toner and burnt coffee, an office scent that had clung to Nancy's memory from her school secretary days. She stood at the reception desk, her purse clutched to her chest, watching the receptionist type with the speed of someone who'd stopped caring about precision years ago. "Reason for visit?" the woman asked without looking up. Nancy adjusted her hearing aid subtly, amplifying the voice just enough. "I'm here to clarify a record. It's about a housing form with my name on it." The receptionist finally met her eyes. "You'll want investigations. Down the hall, second door left. Officer Navarro." Nancy thanked her and made her way down the linoleum corridor, each step echoing with that old rhythm of bureaucratic patience she'd once taught herself to master. She knocked twice. "Come in," a voice called, steady, professional, female. Officer Kim Navarro looked up from a stack of files, her dark hair pulled back tight, her uniform neat but not unfriendly. "Ms. Ellison, have a seat." Nancy did, folding her hands in her lap. "I was told there's a record showing my name connected to some kind of rental assistance application. My son may have, well, he may have used my information without asking." Navarro flipped open a folder, scanning the printed form. "Derek Ellison?" Nancy's stomach dipped. "Yes, that's him." Navarro turned the form around, sliding it across the desk. "This was submitted 3 months ago. States here he resides with an elderly parent, Nancy Ellison, and provides care support for her. Claimed he contributes to your household expenses." The words blurred for a moment. Nancy blinked, steadying herself. "That's a lie," she said quietly. "He hasn't lived with me in nearly 10 years. Navarro's gaze softened, but her tone remained crisp. "Would you like to file a statement of correction?" Nancy nodded once. "Yes, I'd like that very much." The officer reached for a blank affidavit form, slid it forward, and clicked her pen. "Take your time. Just state the facts." Nancy read each line before writing, her pen gliding with deliberate control. "My son, Derek Ellison, does not reside with me. He does not provide any care or financial support. Any claims to the contrary are false." By the time she signed her name, her hand no longer trembled. Navarro reviewed the paper, then nodded approvingly. "Thank you. This helps. We'll flag the application and investigate further." Nancy exhaled, a sound closer to release than relief. I just wanted the record straight. I worked 40 years to keep my name clean. I won't let him use it for convenience. Navarro leaned back slightly. Good instinct. Too many folks don't check until it's too late. Nancy gave a small, polite smile. Some of us learn to listen even when people think we can't. The afternoon sun caught the edges of downtown glass towers as she exited the building. She walked slowly toward the bus stop, the cool air tightening her face. Each passing car sounded distant and filtered, as if her hearing aid itself respected her quiet pride. Her phone buzzed, Joyce's name lighting the screen. "Done with your mysterious errand?" Joyce asked when Nancy answered. Nancy's voice held a quiet satisfaction. "Let's say I've been cleaning up someone else's paperwork." "Ah," Joyce said, a smile audible through the line. "Does it involve your darling boy and his creative accounting?" "It does. He listed me as a dependent in some housing application. Claimed I live with him." Joyce let out a low whistle. "Oh, he's bold. You file something?" "I did. Signed it and everything." "Well," Joyce said, her tone sharpening into approval, "then let's teach your boy the cost of paperwork." Nancy chuckled softly. He always did skip reading the fine print. By the time she reached home, the early evening light had turned golden over her marigolds. She watered them slowly, feeling the weight of the pen still lingering in her fingers. Inside, her phone blinked again. Another message from Derek, time-stamped just hours ago. "Hey Mom, weird question. If someone calls you from a housing place, just tell them I'm helping you out, okay? It's just a verification thing." Nancy stared at the message, the quiet of her house pressing closer. Then, deliberately, she turned off her hearing aid. The world fell into velvet silence once more. She picked up the small flower shears from her porch table and clipped a fading bloom cleanly from its stem. The afternoon light stretched thin through the living room blinds, turning everything gold and quiet. Nancy sat at her small oak desk, the one she'd bought decades ago when paperwork still meant something you could hold. Her reading glasses perched low on her nose as she filed a copy of her signed affidavit neatly into a folder labeled Personal Records. The phone buzzed beside her elbow. Derek's name glowed on the screen, blue, insistent. Nancy didn't reach for it. She watched the name pulse, the way it always did before voicemail took over. A faint vibration hummed against the wood of the desk, like a trapped insect. She reached instead for her hearing aid remote, a small silver fob no bigger than a car key, and pressed the side button until the world softened to near silence. The ringing dulled to a faraway rhythm she didn't have to obey. The light on the phone blinked 3 times, then stopped. A moment later, her voicemail light came alive. One new message. Nancy exhaled, calm as still water. She didn't play it right away. Instead, she got up and poured herself a glass of iced tea, the lemon slice floating like a bright coin in the amber liquid. Only then did she press play on speaker. Derek's voice filled the quiet room, all false brightness and casual charm. "Hey, Mom. Just wanted to check in, see how you're doing. Haven't heard from you in a bit. Everything okay?" A pause, then a laugh. "Anyway, I've got some things moving again, work-wise. Probably gonna be flush soon, so don't worry about me. Just wanted to say hey." Click. End of message. Nancy smiled faintly, not at his words, but at the way he filled silence when he was nervous. The same way he used to chatter through dentist appointments as a kid. She deleted the voicemail. Then she opened a folder labeled Medical and began sorting through neatly stapled pages, lab results, audiology reports, insurance summaries. Everything about her life, organized in quiet, deliberate order. Her eyes paused on one page, Power of Attorney, Current Designee, Derek Ellison. For a moment, she didn't breathe. Her pen hovered above the paper before she reached for the phone. Not to call him, but to schedule an appointment with her audiologist, Dr. Helen Spence. Dr. Spence's office sat in a renovated craftsman house on North Broadway, the kind that smelled faintly of eucalyptus and printer paper. The waiting room was warm, filled with muted colors and the comforting hum of white noise machines. When Nancy's name was called, she followed Dr. Spence down the hallway into the testing room. The audiologist gave her a kind smile. "Haven't seen you in a while, Nancy. Everything working okay with your aid?" "It is," Nancy said evenly, taking a seat. "But I think I need to tighten a few things, just in case." Dr. Spence adjusted the small device behind Nancy's ear, fingers steady and sure. "Your hearing's stable, which is good. But you're wise to stay proactive." She paused, tapping notes into the computer. "A lot of patience. Wait until they notice decline. You never wait, do you?" Nancy smiled, a small private curve of the mouth. "I've had enough surprises lately." Dr. Spence chuckled. "Fair enough. Anything else you'd like printed? Some people like to keep paper copies of their charts." "Yes," Nancy said, her tone firm but polite. "Please print everything. The last few test summaries, too." While the printer whirred in the corner, Nancy studied the rows of hearing aids displayed under glass, each one smaller, sleeker, smarter than the last. There was something quietly empowering about the technology, a tool that could amplify or silence at her command. Dr. Spence returned with a crisp folder. "Here you go, all up to date." Nancy tucked the papers into her purse carefully. "Thank you, Doctor. You've been wonderful." "Always happy to help," Dr. Spence replied. "And Nancy, keep doing what you're doing. You've got that calm that comes from being in control." Nancy smiled, but behind it sat something colder, clearer. Outside, the sky was the color of tarnished silver. Leaves skittered across the sidewalk as she walked toward her car. When she climbed in, she pulled out the printed records and ran her fingers along the top edge of the papers. Smooth, real, irrefutable. Her phone buzzed again. Derek. She watched the screen flash, and fade, until it fell silent. Nancy rested her hearing aid remote on her thigh and whispered to no one. "Not this time." Then she turned the aid off entirely, sealing herself in that familiar velvet quiet. The sound of her own pulse was soft and certain, like footsteps leading away from something. Monday morning brought a cool drizzle over Clintonville, the kind that made Nancy's porch steps glisten like stone. She sat at her desk again, coffee steaming beside her, Dr. Spence's folder still open like a manifesto of quiet control. On top of it, she'd placed Derek's last text. "Please pick up, Mom." She hadn't. She wouldn't. Instead, she dialed a new number, one she'd found scribbled in the fine print of her son's lease notice. The Franklin Lofts, downtown leasing office. "Franklin Lofts, this is Hannah," a bright, rehearsed voice answered. "How can I help you?" Nancy adjusted her hearing aid slightly. "Yes, good morning. My name is Nancy Ellison. I just want to clarify something. I believe my name may have been used as a co-signer on my son's lease. I'd like to confirm whether that's true." There was a brief silence on the line, followed by the soft tapping of keys. "All right, Ms. Ellison. Can you spell your last name one more time?" Nancy did. The woman's tone shifted. "Actually, this is very helpful. You're listed here as resident parent and co-signer. That's odd. We don't have your signature or verification paperwork on file." Nancy kept her voice even. "That's because I never signed anything." "Oh," Hannah said, startled. "Then you're saying this isn't correct?" "That's exactly what I'm saying." The woman cleared her throat. "We'll definitely need to correct this. Thank you for bringing it to our attention, Ms. Ellison. Honestly, this helps a lot." Nancy allowed herself a small, controlled breath, glad to hear it. As she hung up, she noticed her reflection in the dark window pane. Soft sweater, neat hair, the faint gleam of her hearing aid catching the morning light. She didn't look angry. She looked settled. By Wednesday, the consequences arrived right on schedule. Nancy was pruning her front hedges when Joyce's car pulled up to the curb, horn tooting twice. Joyce stepped out with her usual caffeine energy, a paper bag of muffins in one hand. "You've got that look," she said, eyeing Nancy. "What did he do this time?" Nancy brushed leaves from her gloves. "Nothing. Yet." Joyce arched an eyebrow. "Which means you did something." Nancy nodded toward the porch table where a stack of neatly organized folders sat under a paperweight shaped like an acorn. "I just clarified a few misunderstandings with his landlord." Joyce took a sip from her travel mug. "You told them you weren't his financial savior?" "I told them the truth." As if on cue, Nancy's phone pinged on the table. A forwarded message from the leasing office. Notification: Derek Ellison. Late rent notice. Cosigner documentation voided. Joyce leaned in, whistled low. "He's going to lose that shiny downtown loft." Nancy slid the paperweight aside and placed the printed notice in her records folder. "He wanted leverage," she said softly. "He gave me a trail." Joyce grinned, biting into her muffin. "That's almost poetic." Nancy smirked faintly. "So is justice." That evening, the rain returned, heavier this time, drumming steady on the roof. Nancy sat by the window, lamp casting a warm cone of light over her paperwork. She took careful satisfaction in each labeled folder: medical, financial, legal. When the phone rang, she didn't expect the number that appeared. "Officer Navarro." She answered, her tone calm. "This is Nancy." "Ms. Ellison, it's Navarro from Housing. I wanted to update you personally since you filed that affidavit with us." Nancy straightened in her chair, pen poised over a blank notepad. "Yes?" "We ran the verification. Turns out your son submitted multiple claims, not just the one listing you. He's been applying for rent subsidies and benefits under false information." Navarro paused, her tone measured. "He's now under official investigation for benefits fraud." For a moment, the rain was all Nancy could hear. Soft percussion against glass, rhythmic and sure. "I see," she said finally. "Thank you for letting me know." Navarro continued. "He'll likely be contacted soon for questioning. We may need your statement again down the line, but for now, you're clear." Nancy's pen tapped the desk once, twice. "If you need anything further, I'll be here." "I appreciate your cooperation, Ms. Ellison, and, for what it's worth, good for you. Not everyone stands up to family like that." When the call ended, Nancy didn't move for a long time. The hum of her hearing aid filled the silence. Steady, alive, like the low thrum of victory. She opened her notebook and wrote in even letters. October 12th. Derek under investigation. Then she underlined it twice. Later, Joyce called just as Nancy was locking the front door for the night. "So, any fallout yet?" "Not yet," Nancy said, her voice low, deliberate. "But the sound of rain is sweeter than it used to be." Joyce laughed softly. "He's about to get soaked, huh?" Nancy looked out at the slick street, the porch light reflecting gold on wet pavement. Completely. The next morning broke damp and gray, the kind of Ohio chill that seeps straight into the joints. Nancy wrapped her robe tighter and crossed to the kitchen. The phone blinked on the counter. One new voicemail. Derek's name. She filled the kettle, let it hum to life, and pressed play without putting the phone to her ear. His voice spilled into the quiet kitchen, thinner now, strained at the edges. "Hey, Mom, just need a small loan. Nothing big. A bridge thing. My rent's late, but I've got something lined up soon. You know how these transitions go. Just a few hundred. Just for a week or two. Call me back, okay?" The beep at the end sounded almost embarrassed, as if even the machine was tired of hearing him. Nancy poured boiling water over a tea bag, watching the swirl of brown bloom in the mug. Then she turned off her hearing aid completely. The silence filled the room like an old friend taking a seat. By the time Joyce arrived, the kettle was still warm. She brought a newspaper tucked under her arm and a look that said, "I already know." "New message?" she asked, slipping into her usual chair at the small kitchen table. Nancy nodded toward the phone. "You could say that." "Desperate yet?" "Almost symphonic." Joyce laughed, low and rich. "Play it." Nancy obliged, pressing the speaker button. Derek's pleading tone filled the air again. The women sat, sipping tea in perfect synchrony, as if they were listening to some radio drama they'd heard a dozen times before. When it ended, Joyce raised her cup in a mock toast. "Encore." Nancy smirked. "No need. I know all his verses by heart." They both laughed, the sound light but edged with something honest. For the first time, Nancy didn't feel guilty for laughing. She'd spent too many years confusing silence with kindness. Half an hour later, Joyce was flipping through the classifieds when Nancy's phone buzzed again. A text this time. Tracy Vaughn. Nancy read it once, aloud, so Joyce could enjoy it too. "He's not doing well. You should help. You're still his mom." Joyce snorted. Still his mom, not his ATM. Nancy's mouth curved. Exactly. She opened the message options, hit block contact, and set the phone face down beside her mug. "Done?" Joyce asked. "Done." The quiet that followed wasn't heavy. It was shared, purposeful. Outside, a mail truck hissed to a stop, the rhythmic thunk of the door sounding almost like punctuation. Later that afternoon, Nancy stopped by the Clintonville Senior Wellness Center, the place where she and Joyce attended their reading group. The receptionist, a cheerful woman with a lanyard full of smiley pins, waved her over. "Hey, Mrs. Ellison, you're early for book club." "I'm not here for that today." Nancy pulled out her checkbook, flipping to a clean page. "I want to make a donation to the Hearing Clinic Fund." "Oh, that's wonderful," the woman said, beaming. "We're saving for new testing equipment. Every little bit helps." Nancy smiled softly. "Then consider this a little bit." She signed her name with steady, elegant penmanship. When the woman took the slip, Nancy noticed her own handwriting reflected faintly on the countertop glass. Clean lines, no hesitation. "Thank you," the receptionist said. "Would you like it to be anonymous?" "Yes," Nancy said after a beat. "Let's keep it quiet." That evening, the house felt lighter somehow. Nancy brewed another cup of tea, this one chamomile, and settled into her armchair. The voicemail light blinked again. Derek, again. But she didn't move. The marigolds outside were almost gone for the season, their petals folded into quiet little fists against the cold. She admired them anyway, how they still held their shape even as the color faded. Her hearing aid sat on the side table, silent and gleaming in the lamplight. Nancy whispered to the empty room, "I hear you just fine, Derek. I just don't have to listen." She reached for her planner and drew a neat line through tomorrow's date. A small ritual of closure. The knock came just after sunset, sharp, impatient, the kind that expected an answer. Nancy looked up from her book, her reading glasses. Perched halfway down her nose. The sound repeated, louder this time, echoing down the narrow hallway of her bungalow. She didn't flinch. She turned the page instead. When the first shout came, she knew the voice instantly. "Mom, open up!" She closed the book slowly and set it on the side table. The living room was lit by one warm lamp, the curtains drawn tight. The air held the faint scent of lemon polish and tea. Nancy reached for the small silver remote resting near her hearing aid charger. One click, and the world softened into silence. The knocks became only vibrations through the floorboards, muted, manageable. She sat back, spine straight, and resumed reading. Her lips formed the words silently, her finger tracing each line like a promise to herself. Outside, Derek's voice rose again, blurred and muffled behind the door. Even without hearing him, she could picture the gestures, the hand through his hair, the pacing, the frustration that came when charms stopped working. The pounding turned to the rattle of the doorknob, then a pause. Through the small gap in the curtains, Nancy could see the edge of his silhouette on the porch. He bent down, slid something through the mail slot, a folded note, and left. The headlights of his car flashed briefly across her marigolds before disappearing down the street. For a long time, she didn't move. The silence was a companion now, loyal and precise. Finally, she rose and walked to the door. The note lay on the rug, a faint crease of damp where his fingers must have pressed it. She picked it up carefully and unfolded it under the lamp. The handwriting was rushed, uneven. "Mom, I don't know what's going on, but everything's a mess right now. Please, just call me. I just need a few days to figure things out. I can crash at your place until things settle. Please." Nancy read it twice. Her pulse didn't change. She carried the note to her desk, turned on the shredder, and fed the paper through in one smooth motion. The blades hummed softly, the sound crisp and final. Thin ribbons fell into the bin like white confetti. When the last edge disappeared, she turned the machine off and listened to the new quiet it left behind. The next morning, Joyce showed up with her usual coffee and curiosity. She spotted the empty shredder bin first. "I take it we had correspondence?" Nancy stirred sugar into her tea, calm and unhurried. "He came by last night." Joyce sat up straighter. "He what?" "Pounded on the door for a while, left a note." "And?" "I shredded it." Joyce blinked, then gave a low whistle. "Well, that's one way to keep the conversation short." Nancy smiled faintly, a tired kind of satisfaction beneath it. "He wants a roof, not a relationship." Joyce nodded slowly. "And you're done giving him both." "I'm done," Nancy confirmed. She looked toward the window where the rain had started again, soft and unthreatening. Joyce reached across the table, her fingers brushing Nancy's wrist. "Proud of you, you know." "I'm proud of me too," Nancy said, her voice quiet but certain. That afternoon, Nancy sat by the living room window, her hearing aid switched back on. The faint sounds of the neighborhood filled the space. Distant laughter, a lawnmower, a passing car splashing through puddles. A familiar blue sedan slowed in front of her house. Derek's. He parked at the curb, engine idling. From her window, Nancy could see him pacing beside the car, phone in hand, checking it, waiting for something that wouldn't come. His movements were frantic, the mirror image of her calm. He looked toward the house once, long and searching. Nancy didn't move. Eventually, he kicked at a loose pebble on the sidewalk, got back into the car, and pulled away too fast, tires spitting water. The taillights vanished down the street. Nancy exhaled softly and closed her curtains. She walked to her bookshelf, retrieved the novel she'd been reading, and settled back into her chair. The house seemed to sigh with her, content, steady. The next morning arrived bright and cold, that kind of October sunlight that made everything look too honest. Nancy stood in front of her hall mirror, smoothing the front of her navy cardigan, her reflection framed by the quiet order of her house. The phone sat face down on the table, silent for once. The shredder bin was empty. The air, free of pleading voicemails. She picked up her folder marked Estate and tucked it neatly into her bag. The paper inside was crisp, uncreased, the product of long consideration. When she stepped outside, the autumn air smelled like clean leaves and faint wood smoke. The law office was tucked inside a converted Victorian near the edge of downtown. Inside, the scent of lemon cleaner mingled with coffee. Nancy took a seat in the conference room where a thick folder already waited for her. Her estate planner, a precise woman in her 50s named Evelyn Pike, greeted her with a professional smile. "Morning, Ms. Ellison. I've prepared the final draft of your will. You've reviewed the summary already?" "Yes," Nancy said. Her tone was calm, but her eyes were bright, focused. Evelyn opened the folder and slid the first document toward her. "Just to confirm, you're removing your son, Derek Ellison, as sole beneficiary and designating new charitable recipients instead." Nancy nodded once. "That's correct." "May I ask where you'd like those funds to go?" Nancy's lips curved slightly. "To the Columbus Hearing Access Scholarship, for students with hearing loss who can't afford devices or treatment." Evelyn's brows lifted in approval. "That's a wonderful choice. You're certain?" "I've never been more certain." At that, Evelyn gestured toward the notary table near the window. "Then we'll just need 2 witnesses. I have one from our staff, and you've arranged for a second?" "I have," Nancy said, as the door opened behind her. Dr. Helen Spence entered, her warm professionalism cutting through the office's sterile air. "Good morning, Nancy." She offered a reassuring nod to Evelyn. "Here to make sure my favorite patient's hearing remains as clear as her conscience." Nancy laughed softly, genuine and steady. "You keep both in good shape, Doctor." As the documents were reviewed, Helen stood beside Nancy's chair, one hand lightly resting on the backrest. The rhythmic scratch of pen on paper filled the room. No raised voices, no second thoughts. When Nancy finished signing, Evelyn gathered the pages neatly. "That's it. All official. You've just finalized your estate, Ms. Ellison." Nancy set the pen down, her hand completely still. "Feels lighter than I expected." Dr. Spence smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised how clarity feels." Later, at the senior center, Nancy found Joyce in her usual spot by the bulletin board, pinning up flyers for the reading group's upcoming mystery series. Joyce turned, spotting the manila envelope in Nancy's hand. "Well, well," she said, wiping her hands on her cardigan. "You look like someone who just burned an old map." Nancy chuckled. "Something like that." "You did it, didn't you?" "I did." Joyce stepped closer, lowering her voice. "He's really out of it now?" "Entirely. Everything goes to the scholarship fund." Joyce gave a low whistle, admiration and awe intertwined. "Your silence is louder than his shouting." Nancy smiled, eyes soft but unyielding. "I suppose it's the only language he taught me to master." The 2 women shared a quiet laugh before Joyce looped her arm through Nancy's. "Come on, righteous woman, let's get groceries before you start a revolution." At the store, the aisles glowed with late afternoon light. Nancy moved methodically. Eggs, bread, milk, fresh apples. She didn't rush, didn't linger. Every step felt like punctuation on a chapter ending just as it should. When she reached the checkout line, a familiar sound caught her ear. A faint buzzing from her hearing aid, the gentle static that came before clarity settled in. She adjusted it slightly, smiling as the cashier's words came into focus. Something about loyalty points, savings, ordinary conversation that had never sounded sweeter. Nancy tucked the receipt into her purse and stepped outside. The wind lifted a strand of her hair, carrying the scent of cinnamon from the bakery next door. She breathed in deeply. For the first time in months, there was no trace of weight in her chest, just space. The morning was glassy and pale, the kind that made the world look rinsed clean but cold. Nancy parked her car across from the Franklin Lofts, the downtown complex that had once been her son's stage for pretending. Now it looked stripped of its shine, paper notices taped to doors, the lobby mailboxes dented from years of misuse. She sat behind the wheel for a moment, watching a man in a maintenance jacket sweep cigarette butts from the curb. Her fingers brushed the folded piece of paper sitting on the passenger seat, A flyer from the Columbus Transitional Shelter, torn neatly from a community bulletin board at the senior center. She hadn't planned to leave anything for Derek. But the thought had come to her while sorting groceries the night before, a kind of quiet punctuation to everything that had passed. No letter, no lecture, just a direction. Nancy stepped out of the car, coat buttoned against the wind, and crossed to the building's entrance. Her shoes made crisp sounds on the concrete, each one deliberate. Inside the vestibule, the faint smell of mildew and stale perfume lingered. She found Derek's mailbox, Ellison D., the label curling at one corner. She slid the flyer through the slot and stood for a beat. The small rectangle of paper disappeared into darkness. She wrote nothing else. Then she turned and walked away. By late afternoon, the sky had gone dull gray, threatening rain. Nancy sat at her kitchen table with her planner open, jotting a grocery reminder when her phone buzzed. Not a call, but a voice memo notification from Derek. She stared at it for several seconds before pressing play. His voice hit like static. Harsh. Unraveled. Unbelievable, Mom. You leave a damn shelter flyer in my box? Are you kidding me? You think this is funny? You think you're teaching me some lesson? I can't believe you're doing this. You're supposed to be my mother, not... The message cut off mid-word, then resumed. Lower, but meaner. You'll regret this when people find out what you're really like. You're not some saint, you're... Click. Message over. Nancy didn't flinch. She scrolled down, hit forward, and sent the file directly to Officer Navarro with a short note. Thought you should have this for your records. Her thumb lingered over the screen for a moment. Then she set the phone aside and reached for her tea. Joyce dropped by half an hour later, bringing wind and sarcasm with her. You've been quiet today, she said, slipping off her coat. That's either peace or mischief. A bit of both, Nancy said. Joyce spotted the phone on the table, the message thread still open. Ah, he's lashing out again? Nancy nodded. Voice memo, mostly noise. Joyce poured herself a glass of water from the sink. He's about to play the pity card, that's next in the script. Nancy looked up, her expression calm but sharp. He's not the only one with stories. Joyce smiled approvingly. There she is, the queen of selective hearing. They sat together in companionable silence for a while, the hum of the refrigerator steady in the background. Rain began tapping softly against the window, thin and rhythmic. The next morning, Nancy's phone lit up again, not with a voicemail, but with a notification banner from an unfamiliar link. She frowned, opened it, and stared. A GoFundMe page. Title: Help Nancy Ellison recover from her medical emergency. Her photo, one Tracy must have lifted from Facebook, sat above a sob story written in shaky grammar about a devoted mother suffering from sudden hearing loss complications. Below it, donations were already coming in. Names, dollar amounts, well wishes for speedy recovery. Nancy's stomach went cold. The story twisted her truth into pity, a parody of her life. She scrolled to the organizer's name, Tracy Vaughn. The bile rose before the anger did. She clicked the share history. Derek's account had shared it an hour earlier with a caption. Please help my mom, she's struggling. Nancy's hand hovered over the screen. Then, slowly, she took a breath, forced her pulse to even out, and reached for her file folders. She didn't panic. She documented. A screenshot of the fundraiser, a timestamp of the post, a note in her planner. Fraud. New version. By the time Joyce arrived for lunch, Nancy had already sent everything to Officer Navarro and her lawyer. Joyce read the printout of the fundraiser, eyebrows arched so high they nearly disappeared. Medical emergency, huh? They really outdid themselves. Nancy's lips tightened, but her eyes gleamed with quiet fire. They wanted attention. They're about to get it. Joyce leaned back, arms crossed. You sure you're ready for whatever comes next? Nancy folded the papers into a neat stack, her tone steady. I've been ready since the day he laughed at me for listening. The morning after the fake fundraiser went live, the world outside Nancy's bungalow looked spotless, washed clean by night rain. Inside, she sat at her desk, her laptop open to the GoFundMe page that bore her name like an accusation. Help Nancy Ellison recover from her medical emergency. She read every line, each invented word about her medical crisis, each lie about her brave son struggling to care for her. Derek and Tracy's fantasy version of her life scrolled downward in a dizzying parade of deceit. The comments section was worse. Praying for your recovery, Mrs. Ellison? Hang in there, Derek. You're a good son. Nancy's hands didn't shake. Her pen, resting beside her keyboard, tapped a slow rhythm, calm, surgical. She opened a new document and began to list everything. Claim 1. Nancy Ellison has suffered sudden hearing loss complications. False. Documented audiology reports confirm stable condition. Claim 2. Her son Derek has been covering medical expenses out of pocket. False. She hasn't accepted a cent from him in years. Claim 3. She's in danger of losing her home. False. Fully owned, paid off since 2012. For every falsehood, she attached a file, medical records, property statements, even a notarized copy of her updated will. The truth was her weapon, and she wielded it with a school secretary's precision. When the file was ready, she emailed it to two people, Officer Navarro and Attorney Mitchell Price, her lawyer, recently looped into Derek's fraud case. Subject line: GoFundMe misrepresentation, immediate action requested. Then she sat back and exhaled. The house seemed to echo that release. By mid-afternoon, Nancy's phone buzzed. A text from Navarro. Received and reviewed. Excellent documentation. We're coordinating with legal. Sit tight. She smiled faintly, then turned her attention to her hearing aid charger on the table. The steady green light blinked, tiny but bright. Alive, loyal, unpretentious. It struck her how much honesty came from the smallest things. The next morning, she was at Dr. Spence's office again. The waiting room was nearly empty. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and rain-damp carpet. When the audiologist appeared, she carried her calm professionalism like a cloak. "Nancy," she said warmly, "I heard about the nonsense online. Navarro called me for verification." Nancy raised an eyebrow. "I figured she might." "I sent over a formal statement," Dr. Spence said, pulling a printed copy from her folder. "It certifies that your hearing is stable and there's no medical emergency, or any need for financial aid. I made it very clear you're in excellent health." Nancy accepted the paper, her thumb brushing over the embossed letterhead. "Thank you, Helen. You've always made sure people hear me clearly." Dr. Spence smiled, the faintest twinkle in her eye. "Selective hearing works both ways, doesn't it?" "Precisely." They shared a quiet laugh, two women who understood the strength in understatement. By evening, the storm broke. Not from the sky, but online. Nancy was sitting on her porch, wrapped in a shawl, the air thick with the scent of wet earth and geraniums. The sun was setting low, streaking the neighborhood gold and coral. Her phone buzzed again, notifications flooding in. She opened one. GoFundMe campaign removed. Policy violation underneath, a message from Navarro. Platform cooperation confirmed. Fraudulent fundraiser taken down. Investigation ongoing. We'll be in touch soon. Nancy set the phone on the armrest beside her. A breeze lifted the edge of the shawl, cool against her neck. For the first time in days, she let herself breathe without calculation. Across the street, porch lights flickered on one by one. Small acts of ordinary living. A couple argued softly about dinner plans. Someone's dog barked. A radio played an old pop song. Life, untainted and normal, unfolded all around her. Later that night, Joyce called. "Have you seen it?" she asked, voice giddy. "They took it down. The internet is a bonfire of deleted posts and apologies." Nancy smiled faintly. "Good. There's more," Joyce said. "Derek just posted some vague video. Taking accountability, he calls it. Looks like a toddler who lost his favorite toy." Nancy's tone stayed flat. "He's panicking. You're not even a little curious?" "No," Nancy said, rising to close her porch window. "I already know his story. I just stopped letting him tell mine." A few minutes later, she did glance at her phone. There it was, Derek's video, time-stamped 2 hours earlier. He looked unshaven, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. The background was dim, messy, the illusion of success stripped away. "Hey, everyone," he began, trying for sincerity. "Just want to clear some things up. There's been a misunderstanding with that fundraiser. I never meant for it to get out of hand." Nancy watched his lips move, but she didn't press play for sound. Her hearing aid hummed faintly, amplifying the soft rustle of wind through the porch flowers instead. She smiled, small, genuine, untouched. The apology came on a Thursday morning, sandwiched between a reminder from her dentist and a senior center newsletter. Nancy had just finished watering her windowsill herbs when her phone buzzed on the counter. The screen glowed with a new voicemail icon, Derek Ellison, 2:03 minutes. For a moment, she stared at it. The phone seemed almost nervous to deliver its burden. She didn't press play. She didn't have to. The first few lines of the transcript preview appeared automatically, gray words forming like smoke. "Hey, Mom. I know you probably hate me right now. I get it. I messed up. But you've got to understand. Things got out of control. I was just trying to—" That was all she needed to read. Nancy swiped right. Delete. The digital sound of erasure, a small, satisfying click, filled the air. She poured herself another cup of coffee, the smell rich and grounding. Outside, the morning traffic hummed past, oblivious. She liked that. The idea that the world didn't pause for guilt. When Joyce arrived an hour later, she carried both scones and commentary. "Heard the prodigal son's on a redemption tour," she said, setting the bag on the counter. "My neighbor showed me his video before it vanished, all crocodile eyes and half a haircut." Nancy chuckled softly, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "He sent me an apology voicemail. I didn't listen." Joyce's grin widened. "Progress. Used to be you'd at least roll your eyes before deleting." Nancy leaned against the counter, mug in hand. "I don't need to hear what regret sounds like when it's still about himself." Joyce bit into a scone. "You want to throw him one last crumb? Something to shut him up?" Nancy raised an eyebrow. "Such as?" Joyce shrugged. "I don't know. A job link, maybe. Let him dig his own way out for once." Nancy's lips curved just slightly. "That's not pity," she said. "That's logistics." She reached for her phone, opened a blank message, and typed one line. "Workforce Development Center, 1973, Cleveland Ave walk-ins on Tuesdays." No greeting, no signature, no emotion. She hit send. A few seconds later, the message showed as delivered. She locked the screen and set the phone face down. Joyce watched her with mild admiration. "That's colder than my ex-husband's alimony check." Nancy smiled faintly. "It's not cold. It's clear." That afternoon, Nancy drove to the senior center. The parking lot shimmered with heat from the unseasonably warm day, and she carried a tote full of informational pamphlets for the hearing wellness workshop. Inside, the center buzzed with life, laughter, shuffling chairs, someone tuning a guitar for the afternoon sing-along. She loved this soundscape, human, imperfect, and real. "Ms. Ellison," called the receptionist, waving her over. "You're early. Dr. Spence just dropped off some demo kits for the workshop." Nancy smiled. "I'll help set up." The conference room smelled of coffee and hand sanitizer. Rows of folding chairs faced a projector screen displaying "Hear Well, Live Well" in cheerful blue letters. She arranged handouts in tidy stacks, each one explaining how to maintain, clean, and protect hearing aids. When the session began, she sat near the front as a volunteer, helping the instructor guide attendees through cleaning techniques. She adjusted one woman's earpiece gently, explaining how to remove the battery door with a toothpick. "You've got steady hands," the woman said. Nancy smiled. "Years of practice, and better boundaries." Laughter rippled softly through the group. Later, during the Q&A, someone asked what to do when family members mocked their hearing loss. The room grew quiet, waiting for an answer. Nancy didn't hesitate. "You remind yourself that hearing isn't just about sound," she said. "It's about choice. You get to decide who earns your attention." Heads nodded. A few people smiled. The instructor gave her a small, approving glance. After the session, Nancy lingered in the doorway, watching sunlight slant across the polished floor. She felt that strange, calm fullness again, the kind that comes when silence finally stops being punishment and becomes peace. She gathered her things and stepped outside. The air had cooled, carrying the faint scent of cut grass. Her phone buzzed in her purse. She almost ignored it until she saw the preview flash: Officer Navarro. "We've got developments in Derek's case. You'll want to hear this directly." Nancy's reflection stared back from her car window, poised, unhurried, resolute. She turned her hearing aid slightly higher, catching the distant chirp of a bird in the parking lot. "All right," she murmured. "Let's hear it." The week turned colder, the kind of mid-October chill that scraped through windows and made every sound feel sharper. Nancy noticed it not in the air, but in her son's absence. Derek's calls had stopped. The noise that once filled her voicemail, excuses, apologies, accusations, was gone. Silence had finally taken his place. Then, on Tuesday morning, a message appeared from a number she didn't recognize. The preview flashed briefly before vanishing behind her email notification. She opened it anyway. "Tracy Vaughn. This is awkward, but Derek and I split up. He drained my account. I just need $100 to cover rent until Friday. Please, Ms. Ellison, woman to woman." Nancy stared at the message for a long moment. The gall of it almost made her laugh. Without replying, she opened the menu and tapped Report Junk. Then Block Number. There was something deeply satisfying in the clean finality of it. The way the screen went still. The way no noise followed. She poured herself a cup of tea, steady as a clock, and turned the radio to the local classical station. The strings filled the room, gentle and bright. That afternoon, Joyce showed up with her sleeves rolled up and a cardboard box balanced on one hip. "Operation Closure," she announced. "Let's make some space." Nancy smiled. "You read my mind." The two women spent the next hour in Nancy's guest room, the one that used to hold Derek's leftover things. A childhood baseball glove, a few outdated tech gadgets he'd temporarily stored, even a high school yearbook, spine cracked, his teenage grin still cocky and certain. Joyce picked up a photo of Derek at 16, arms slung over his first car. "You keeping any of this?" Nancy hesitated, then placed the photo gently into the discard pile. "No, I've already kept enough of his noise." They packed a few keepsakes: her late husband's watch, family photos worth keeping, a few framed certificates from her school years, and loaded them into Joyce's trunk. The drive to the storage facility was quiet, save for the hum of tires on wet pavement. When they arrived, Nancy signed the rental form, neatly wrote "Personal Archives" on the box labels, and slid them into the locker. Joyce leaned against the doorway, hands in her jacket pockets. "That's it, huh? The past, boxed and locked." Nancy looked at the neat stack of containers and nodded once. "It feels peaceful." Joyce smiled softly. You finally got your own volume control. When Nancy returned home, a light rain had started, thin and persistent, whispering across the roof. She set her purse down and walked to the mail slot by the door. A single envelope had been pushed through. Forwarding service notification. Inside, the form still listed Derek's old apartment as linked to her address, a bureaucratic hangover. Nancy fetched a pen and carefully crossed it out, writing in clean block letters. Mail forwarding for Derek Ellison. Cancelled. She sealed it in a new envelope, ready for the morning post. It felt like the last thread had finally been cut. Later that night, she sat in her favorite armchair, the one facing the front window. Outside, the rain slowed, fading into stillness. She reached up and turned her hearing aid off. The room folded into velvet quiet. She could feel the pulse in her fingertips, the rhythm of her own breathing, all the small sounds that no longer had to compete with anyone else's demands. Nancy closed her eyes and smiled, the peace almost physical. For the first time, silence didn't just protect her, it rewarded her. The next morning, as she finished sorting her mail, her phone buzzed. The name that appeared wasn't Derek's this time. Officer Navarro, Nancy answered. Good morning, officer. Navarro's tone was firm, measured, but carried a trace of sympathy. Ms. Ellison, I wanted to inform you personally. The investigation into your son's benefits filings is complete. He's been officially flagged for housing fraud. Multiple false claims, including the one with your name. Nancy didn't speak at first. The words landed like stones dropped into calm water. No splash, just ripples spreading through her chest. I see, she said finally. Navarro continued. We've referred the case to the county prosecutor. You won't be required for further statements, but I wanted you to hear it from me. Nancy nodded slowly. Thank you for letting me know. A brief pause. Then Navarro added, You did the right thing, Ms. Ellison. I hope you can finally rest easy. Nancy smiled faintly. I already have. When the call ended, she placed the phone on the table, next to her silent hearing aid. The world around her was utterly still, not fragile, not empty, but clean. She rose, crossed to the window, and looked out at her garden. The marigolds had withered to dry stalks, but she didn't mind. They had done their job. The morning air was brittle with frost, the kind that made every exhale visible, every sound thinner. Nancy stood in her garden, pruning shears in hand, trimming back what was left of the marigolds. Their stems, brown and brittle, snapped cleanly beneath her careful grip. The earth smelled faintly metallic, cold and honest. She liked it that way. Stripped down, nothing pretending to bloom when the season had clearly turned. Behind her, the neighborhood was waking up. Someone's dog barked twice. A delivery truck hissed to a stop. The faint clang of a trash bin lid carried over the air. Nancy's hearing aid caught it all in perfect balance, a symphony of ordinary life. She crouched to gather the cut stems into a small pile when she heard the gate creak. Morning, Ms. Ellison. It was Marlene, her neighbor from 2 houses down, wrapped in a quilted jacket, carrying her usual coffee thermos. Marlene had the friendly habit of gossiping without malice, the sort of woman who delivered news the way a mailman did, dutifully, even when it didn't belong to her. Morning, Nancy said, standing, wiping her hands on her gardening gloves. Marlene stepped closer, lowering her voice just enough to make it more conspicuous. I wasn't sure if I should mention it, but, well, someone saw Derek at the Kroger lot off High Street. Said he was sleeping in his car. Nancy paused, the pruning shears still in her hand. The metal caught the morning light, bright, steady. I see, she said simply. Marlene hesitated. They said he looked rough. You okay hearing that? Nancy smiled faintly, polite as a closing door. I'm fine. Marlene. Thank you. The other woman seemed relieved by the response, if not a little deflated by the lack of reaction. Well, if you need anything, I don't, Nancy said softly. But I appreciate it. Marlene nodded and shuffled away, her footsteps crunching on the frozen grass. Nancy went back to trimming, methodical as ever. One stem at a time, one breath at a time. Each cut felt deliberate, necessary. She worked until the garden looked clean again, bare, but honest. When she finished, she gathered the bundle of dead flowers into a paper bag and carried it to the bin. She paused, looking down at the marigold stems resting like small broken bones inside the bag. Everything returns to quiet, she murmured and closed the lid. That evening, the frost returned early, creeping across her porch railing like lace. Nancy sat inside by the window, a small fire flickering in the hearth. The warmth colored the room gold, shadows curling gently around the furniture. Her phone lay on the table beside her, screen dark, silent. She had left her hearing aid in its charger. Off, resting, just like her. Then it lit up. Derek. Ellison. Calling. She didn't move. The name pulsed once, twice, a ghost trying to claw its way back into the living. The call went to voicemail. Then came the familiar little red light. She didn't press play. Not even curiosity stirred this time. Instead, she reached for her knitting, soft gray yarn looping calmly around her fingers. The only sound was the steady clicking of needles and the occasional crack from the fire. When the phone buzzed again, another message, she slid it gently into a drawer and closed it. A knock at the door came not long after, soft, but certain. Nancy stood and opened it to find Joyce, grinning, 2 bottles of wine in hand. "Emergency delivery," Joyce declared. "1 bottle for celebration, 1 for reflection. You pick which is which." Nancy chuckled, stepping aside. "Both sound overdue." They settled into the living room, glasses clinking, the firelight softening their faces. Joyce poured generously and handed a glass over. "So," Joyce said, stretching her legs, "how's the peace treaty with yourself holding up?" "Perfectly," Nancy replied. Joyce studied her for a moment, then asked, "You heard from him, didn't you?" Nancy took a sip, the wine dry and warm on her tongue. "He called." "And?" "I didn't answer." Joyce raised her glass in a small salute. "To boundaries." Nancy smiled, clinking hers lightly against it. "To silence." They drank. For a long moment neither spoke. The crackle of the fire filled the space, its rhythm soft and soothing. Joyce leaned back, eyes half closed, content. Nancy's gaze drifted toward the side table drawer where her phone was hidden. The faintest red glow bled through the crack. A voicemail waiting, like a heartbeat refusing to die out. She didn't reach for it. Instead, she turned to Joyce. "You ever notice," she said quietly, "how peaceful a house sounds when you've stopped expecting it to ring?" Joyce smiled sleepily. "That's not peace, honey. That's power." Nancy looked toward the window. The frost outside shimmered under the streetlight, pale and deliberate. She let the quiet settle deep inside her. The next morning dawned pale and brittle, sunlight spilling across the frost like cracked glass. Nancy stood on her porch, bundled in her gray coat, watching her breath curl into the air. The world was quiet, the kind of quiet that came not from absence but from balance. Nothing pressing in, nothing demanding to be heard. A small box sat on the porch rail beside her mug of coffee. The new video doorbell she'd ordered 2 days ago. Joyce had teased her about it. "Who you expecting, Secret Service?" Nancy had smiled. "No, I'm expecting peace, and I'd like a clear view of whoever tries to interrupt it." She crouched now, the soft click of the screwdriver echoing faintly against the house. The doorbell's blue light flickered once, then glowed steady. "Recording?" watching, proof that entry to her world now came on her terms. When she stood, she caught her reflection faintly in the brass handle of the door. Calm, certain, untouched. Later, at her desk, Nancy scrolled through her bank's online donation portal. The cursor hovered over the Franklin County Veterans Housing Fund, a group she'd read about in the local paper, one that built transitional homes for veterans who'd fallen through the system's cracks. She entered the amount, checked one-time gift, and paused before clicking submit. Her lips curved slightly. "A home for those who earned it," she murmured. Then she hit confirm. The confirmation email appeared instantly, neat, efficient, no guilt attached. She printed it out and added it to her donation folder. Another record of choice. That afternoon, she drove to Dr. Spence's office for her fitting. The audiology clinic smelled of fresh paint and rain-damp carpet. Dr. Spence greeted her with her usual calm warmth. "I think you'll like this model," she said, holding up a small silver device between her fingers. "Sharper sound balance, sleeker design, barely visible once it's in." Nancy smiled. "You're spoiling me, Helen. I'm just keeping you ahead of the curve." As the doctor adjusted the settings, Nancy listened. Really listened. The faint hum of the machine, the tap of Spence's pen, the soft creak of her chair. Every sound layered perfectly, clear but unobtrusive, the way orders should feel. When the fitting was done, she studied herself in the mirror. The new hearing aid was almost invisible, a small arc of precision tucked behind her ear. Elegant, empowering. Dr. Spence caught her reflection and smiled. "Looks good on you, but you don't need me to tell you that." Nancy returned the smile. "No," she said softly. "I can hear it." That weekend, Joyce came by, camera in hand, waving her phone like a weapon of joy. "Come on, Miss Secretive Serenity. You haven't let me document your new upgrade." Nancy was in the garden, kneeling by the flower beds where the late-season pansies had pushed through the frost. She looked up, smirking. "It's just a hearing aid, Joyce, not a crown." "Sweetheart," Joyce said, crouching for the perfect angle. "It's both." Nancy relented, sitting back on her heels as Joyce snapped a few pictures. The morning light hit her face just right. Soft but resolute. Lines etched not with worry but with ownership. Joyce glanced at the result and grinned. Caption writes itself. Unbothered and upgraded. Nancy laughed, the sound bright against the quiet garden. "You're ridiculous." "And you're radiant," Joyce said, winking. "Send me a copy. I'll frame it for the senior center." That evening, as dusk folded over the neighborhood, Nancy returned to her desk. Her journal lay open beside the lamp, the same one she'd kept since her first day of retirement. Its pages were filled with tidy handwriting, dates, notes, reflections that read like quiet victories. She wrote slowly, the pen gliding without hesitation. "He mocked what helped me. He'll never hear peace the way I do." Below it, she drew a small line, a kind of punctuation only she would understand. Outside, the porch flowers stirred gently in the cooling air. The marigolds were gone, but the pansies had taken their place, blooming low and deliberate, a promise that silence didn't mean stillness. Nancy sat back, watching the last of the light fade through her window. Her new hearing aid adjusted automatically, softening the creak of settling wood, amplifying the hush of wind through her yard. For a moment she felt something close to awe, not for what she'd done, but for what she'd finally stopped doing. The letter came on a Wednesday. No return address, just his handwriting. Uneven, heavier than she remembered. The paper was creased, smudged in places, as if it had been folded and unfolded too many times by hands that didn't know what to do with remorse. Nancy found it wedged between her electric bill and a flyer for lawn care. For a moment, she only looked at it. The familiar slant of the E in Ellison, the faint indentation where he must have pressed too hard with the pen. She didn't bring it to the kitchen table right away. She poured herself coffee first, fed the cat that sometimes wandered in from the alley, and straightened a stack of mail that didn't need straightening. Only when the world felt properly ordered again did she sit down and slide a letter opener beneath the seal. Inside, a single page. No envelope padding, no cash, no apology she hadn't already imagined. Mom, I know I've made things hard. I know I hurt you. I don't expect forgiveness, but I need you to know I'm trying. Please don't hate me. If you could just talk to me once more, I'd make it right this time. He'd underlined once more. Twice. Nancy read it exactly one time, her eyes moving calmly across the sentences. She didn't cry. The words had weight but no meaning. Like a song she used to love, now warped by too many bad plays. She stood, walked to her desk, and turned on the shredder. The machine hummed to life, a low, mechanical purr. She fed the letter through slowly, the paper catching light as it disappeared into ribbons. The sound was oddly musical, quiet triumph disguised as static. When it was gone, she turned the shredder off and let the silence bloom in its place. Enough, she whispered. That evening, Nancy dressed for her book club. Soft green sweater, comfortable slacks, silver hearing aid gleaming discreetly against her hair. The Clintonville Senior Reading Circle met at the diner on North High, the one that smelled perpetually of coffee and optimism. Joyce was already there, waving from their usual booth. There she is, the most composed woman in Ohio. Nancy laughed as she slid into the seat. You give me too much credit. Joyce handed her a menu. Not possible. You radiate peace, babe. It's almost suspicious. The others trickled in. 6 women, 2 men, all regulars. The table soon filled with pie plates, coffee cups, and lively chatter. When discussion began, Nancy found herself laughing louder than she had in months. Real laughter, the kind that reached the chest and stayed there. Her new hearing aid caught every inflection, every joke, every kindness layered in between. She could hear the scratch of forks against porcelain, the squeak of shoes on linoleum, the hum of life happening all around her. She didn't filter any of it out. Not tonight. After the meeting, she stopped at the grocery store for milk and apples. Under the humming fluorescent lights, she turned a corner and nearly bumped into Dr. Spence, pushing a half-full cart of produce. Well, look at you, Dr. Spence said with a smile. You seem lighter? Nancy returned it easily. I finally cleared some noise from my life. The audiologist chuckled. That posture says it all. Straight, steady, like someone who's done apologizing for existing. I've had good teachers, Nancy said, adjusting her cart handle. Spence winked. Keep listening, but only to what matters. Later, back at home, Joyce dropped by with a bottle of wine, because friendship, like hearing, was something Nancy had learned to tend. They sat on the porch as evening folded around them, glasses catching the last streaks of orange light. The air smelled faintly of damp soil and blooming pansies. Joyce raised her glass. To silence, she said with mock solemnity. Nancy raised hers in reply, and selective hearing. They clinked glasses. The sound was clear and satisfying, a single pure note that carried farther than either of them expected. They sat for a long time after, listening to the neighborhood settle into its nocturnal rhythm, a car door shutting, a sprinkler hissing to life, a porch screen slamming somewhere down the block. Nancy didn't tune any of it out. She'd earned the right to choose her sound. She looked toward her door, the one that now held her new video bell, dark and silent. Beyond it, her house waited in calm order, every corner hers again. Her hearing aid caught the gentle whir of the night air, amplifying the smallest details, the rustle of leaves, Joyce's quiet sigh, the beat of her own pulse steady in her ears. Nancy smiled. I turned him off, she said softly, almost to herself, and heard peace instead. The wind moved through her garden like a low, approving hum,